Good evening, all. So we have come back with a very interesting topic, and the topic that actually engage a lot of politicians and help them to get elected or not to be elected. Taxation and the level of taxes and why people pay taxes and what is just the justification behind taxes and what are the origins of taxes and why should people bother about taxes and so on. This is a very important topic in politics, in economics, in market competitiveness, and one of the most important elements in government and governance. So on taxes, I shall talk. So basically, the basic idea about tax is collecting money from people to provide it for the government, to provide services, projects, and products for people needs and wants. And it helps in the cycle in the rotational cycle of money within our community. It's a source of revenue for governments, but it's not the only source. There will be other sources of revenue from there will be other sources for revenue from the for the government. Now, the level of taxation and why people pay particular tax. So economists and people should always be thinking about promoting the economy, leading to a level of growth, leading to a more prosperous future. And they also look at that our society also should be more just, should be more stable, and people should look at, should be more equal. So there are different ways of what is the most important, what are our priorities as a human beings. Is it prosperity or is it social cohesion and equality and so on? And the first group of people thinks that taxation should be high on the rich, low on the poor. People should be managing to get a lot of revenue from the rich, not much from the poor because they can't afford, and provide services and projects to the people that can serve everyone, the rich and the poor. The second one is about no, you should actually, as a government, as a regulator, you should collect the minimum possible taxes, and you should let businesses address the needs of people directly rather than you interfere as a government. Things like education, things like healthcare, things like uh, employment, and so on. So you should be acting as as a government should be acting as a minimal regulator, because if you just tax businesses, eventually, if the tax was so high, your companies will lose competitive advantage against other organizations and entities across the globe. It's a very important topic. So this is the dilemma. Should we focus on the social aspect? Should we focus on the economical aspect? What if we focus on the social? What is the impact of focusing on the social aspect on the long-term economical possibilities of the country? What is the impact of the economical aspect on the long-term social stability of the country, especially if you are seeing a great levels of inequality, a great levels of poverty, a great levels of disturbance, and so on. So let us be also more detailed oriented by looking actually, does businesses do businesses address the real needs of people in different markets? And it's very important to understand that markets are different and the levels of economy between different countries are different. So for example, things like R&D. So if you are a small country and you don't have much natural resources, so a lot of your attention will be based on knowledge economy, because you are not on the something called primary economy, which is about natural resources, using natural resources as an economical tool. You are not on the secondary economy, which is about trying to make products out of natural resources. And the third one is about the knowledge economy or tertiary economies, trying to make products not from natural resources, but from human thought and from human inventiveness, from services and from innovations and so on. So you should really understand where does your economy fits within these categories. And so if you are really a country that has a lot of natural resources and that has a lot of companies and products, maybe you should not tax businesses a lot, because your businesses can carry on in terms of employment and so on. But if you are keen to to increase the share of knowledge economy, the share of services within your economy, maybe you'd like to spend more on R&D, maybe you'd like to spend more on innovation, maybe you try to spend more on different things, so you tax more. And maybe you should think, if I tax companies more and they are already not addressing these R&D needs, would they leave the country or would they stay in? And maybe you need to have a look at my talk about capitalism and the problems of capitalism and so on. So let's look at the other perspective. And the other perspective is, okay, so the other perspective says that government should spend on healthcare, should spend on education, should spend on sports, should spend on R&D, and should collect as much tax as needed from the rich people, and tax them even more, and tax them even more, and tax them even more, until all of these needs are addressed. You look at this model and you think, yes, if I did that, would companies stay or would companies leave? Would companies pay or would companies abstain? Would companies uh, lose their competitive advantage? What is the market dynamics they have, and what markets they operate? What are the potential other markets that they will operate in? What is the long-term view of the long-term view of my economy? And of course, you should be thinking very carefully about the details, and very carefully about how you can create a very dynamic and thriving economy that is oriented to growth, and that is oriented to uh, pushing the boundaries and solving the problems of your business. So let's look at a country like Jordan. So that's a very good question. So a country like Jordan, what are the sources, what are the revenues of Jordan? And is it a primary economy? Is it a secondary economy? Is it a tertiary economy? How much money is paid on education? How much money is paid on R&D? What is the quality of education? Is there also private? What is the quality of healthcare? What is the quality of what is the where do we think there is an opportunity for the current? Is it about the current Jordan economy is about utilizing natural resources? Is it about buying natural resources from others and building new products from it, or is it about just focusing on service economy and service oriented, let me say, new products or innovation products, and you focus on the knowledge economy? So if this is the case, you should understand, if you are dependent on knowledge economy, and if you think the knowledge economy is something that you should always be thinking about, then maybe you need to spend more on R&D. Maybe you have to tax the other companies. You have to take a small risk and tax companies more. But if these companies have branches all over the world, and by doing this, they will just leave and not look back at you again, maybe you would lose the basic taxation you used to get. And in a difficult economical conditions, someone has to make a very calculated decision, a decision that is based on proper economic studies, a decision that is fundamentally based on arguments with businesses, is fundamentally based on arguments with social political leaders. So you should understand the two parts of the equation, and you should be very careful on the balance. Another element about taxation, that taxation can be helpful in promoting some social or ecological goals. So some people say that companies do harm the environment, and they do a lot of harm of the environment, and this is natural capital of the country is being lost for the profits of the companies. So we should tax these companies more to compensate for the natural loss of the environment. So we make something like a carbon tax, or we make something like an environmental regulation. So if you have carbon tax, you would promote environmentally friendly businesses, and you would at least try to compensate for part of the natural capital that is being lost. These kinds of arguments is not, these is the levels of argument about taxation these days. It's about, should we tax them more? Should we tax them less? Should we tax on environmental regulation, on carbon tax, or should we not? And if we tax on carbon tax, for example, would businesses be harmed, or would businesses be actually positively affected? What are the risks that we can do, and what are our priorities, and how the worlds operate, and what is the how does the competition looks like on a global scale, and what kind of solutions we would have for the future. That was my talk about taxation. I wish it was useful. It's a good introduction, and I wish you a great evening. Salam.